Well, welcome to another video with Blocs Builder. And in today's video, we're going to make a table just using basic divs and a little bit of CSS. That's right, divs and CSS. And it's pretty easy to make a responsive table with this method. So as you can see here in my example, we have a basic 3-column table that's responsive. As I bring in the window width here, you'll see it starts to shrink up. But we've also got a minimum size width of this table, which means when we get too small, all of a sudden our table will overflow horizontally. And that means not only do we have vertical scrolling, but we also can scroll horizontally through the content of our table. And this is really handy for smaller breakpoints, mobile devices. Okay, so let's get started, shall we? Here I have just a very basic blocks project. I have a couple of columns, a big one at the top here that I'm going to put my table in, and a smaller one down the bottom here. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to create here kind of like a temporary custom brick, if you could call it that, so that as I add the custom CSS, you'll be able to see the changes take place on our canvas. Because quite often as we add custom CSS, we need to add it to the page header, and of course we don't see it or the effect that's going to happen until we preview. So this is a little trick I discovered that we can do. Let's get started, shall we? I'm just going to build the basic structure of our table right here. Our table is going to have a wrapper div that wraps around our entire table, and we're going to have another div which is our main table div, and then we're going to have a div for our header, and then also for our rows, and then we've got divs that are our cells within our header and our rows. So I'm going to start by creating or adding, actually just before I start that, just down here on the bottom, we actually have controls here for our canvas setting. And what I do have disabled is I have the option display add block buttons turned off. If I enable that, you'll see that we get this bigger tick box, plus box, where we can add blocks. And sometimes when we're working with lots of small things that are nested together like divs, these can get in the way. So we can come down to our canvas settings and turn that off. Okay, so I'm going to add a div here. And that's going to be our main wrapper div, and then I'm going to add a div within this one, and that's going to be our main table, and then I'm going to add another one within that, and then I'm going to put one within that one. Okay, and then just to make it simple, this one here I'm going to duplicate. So what we have here is we have our main div, which I'm going to call our easy table wrapper. Now you don't have to stick with this naming. I'm going to expand that, and then our next div inside here I'm going to call easy table, and then with our two nested divs within our easy table, this one is going to be our easy table header and our easy table row. Okay, and then in each one of these we have another div that we're going to call cell. Okay, then we have our basic structure. Now, a number of cells we're going to have here, we're going to duplicate that based on the number of columns that we want to have in our table. But before I do that, I'm just going to add some basic content. So in our header cell, our easy table header, in the cell I am going to add an H3 text element, and down here under our easy table row in the cell I'm going to add a paragraph. Nice. Now what we can do is, because in our example we're using a 3-column table, I'm going to duplicate under our easy table header our cell 2 other times. There we go, we have our 3 columns, and I also need to do that for the cell under our easy table row. Okay, there we have our basic content for our table, and we can add additional rows later. Now we need to style this up. So what I'm going to do is I'm down here in this column that I made at the bottom here, I'm actually going to put a code widget. And with my code widget selected, I'm going to make sure on the right hand panel that I've got preview content is ticked. And with that ticked, it means any CSS that I'm going to write in here will become live on the canvas. Just one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a div in our code widget, and I'm going to use some classes that are from the developer section of the Blocks knowledge base. So if I go to the knowledge base in Blocks and into the developer section, we can find an area called custom brick helper classes. And I'm going to use two classes here. One is called remove on export, which just removes that div when we go to preview it, so it hides all that. And the other one I want to do is brick canvas placeholder. Now that one there allows us to make bricks like this that you'll often see when you add a custom brick to your project. So I'm just going to apply that now to my code widget. So I'll edit the code. I'm just going to position this window, reposition it so it's a great place. Right, okay, I'm going to add a div here, and I'm going to add those two classes, which is remove on export and also brick canvas placeholder. Now if you look underneath here, we can see we've got a blue box. And I'm just going to give that some text, which is called table CSS. Right, and that's all we need to do. Now we've got kind of our own little custom brick going on. Now, when you finish designing your table, you're actually going to want to copy and paste your CSS into your page header and actually remove this code widget. You don't want to keep it on your exported project. Okay, we're going to add some style tags here. Now the main reason why I am hand coding all the CSS, even though a lot of it we can actually do in the class editor, is that there are some styles that are not available in the class editor that we are going to use for this. And in this case, it's much easier to keep it all in one place, and so you can see what's going on here. So the first styles that we're going to add is that we're going to add the classes that we added to our divs here. So I'm just going to put a comment up here, and I'm just going to call this the main table CSS. And the classes that we added was easy table wrapper, easy table header, easy table row, and our cell. Okay. Now we're going to add some styles to these classes. So our easy table wrapper, we're just going to add a couple of display options. So we're going to add first display flex, and then we're going to set the overflow X, lots of typos today, to scroll. And then I'm going to set the left and the right margins to auto, and that just means it just means it will center the table depending on our design. So it's just kind of a handy thing to have in here. So I'm just going to call it margin right auto, margin left auto. Okay, and that's it for our easy table wrapper. The next styles we want to add to our easy table is really we're just setting the minimum width that we want our table to be before it overflows and becomes a horizontal scroll. And so in this case, in my example, I'm going to set the minimum width to 800 pixels, and you can of course change that to suit your design. And then we're going to move on to our easy table header. Now our easy table header and our easy table row are going to have some styles that are exactly the same for both of them. So instead of duplicating these here, what I can do is join them together. So I can add them to the same line and separate them by a comma, which means the styles that I'm about to apply to both of these classes. And I'm going to add a style called display grid. You may not have heard of that one before. And you'll see, if I type this correctly, you'll see our content sort of jumped up a bit above us, as we're starting to now do things that will affect the style of our content. We're going to add another style called grid template columns. And we've got 3 columns, so I need 3 values here. If we would have 4 columns in our table, we would have 4 values here. And in this case, I'm going to actually just set, we can of course set, this is each of these values is setting the width of our columns. So we could have percentages, so I could say 20%, 20%, and you can see how our columns now have lined up. And the last one we could have 20%. Of course that doesn't add up to 100%, but you can see our columns have lined up in the content above us. Or we can actually use flex, and so I'm going to use flex in this case, and to activate flex I'm just going to call it 1FR. The second column I'm going to do 1FR, and you'll see that because it's flex, it's dynamically going to occupy the space. And the third column I'm going to make that 2FR. And so they kind of, we'll make that 2FR. So the third column is twice the width of the first 2 columns. Each one, yeah. So you can play around and get a feel for how these work. We could make the first column here 2, and the middle column 3, and that you can kind of get a feel for how they kind of work around. So we could have 1, 2, 2, and 2. And you'll see how it divides it up dynamically. I kind of tend to use flex, but of course you can use percentage. So we're just going to say 1FR, 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 which will evenly space all 3 columns across the whole width of the table. But I kind of like to break it up just to make it a little different there. So 1FR, 1FR, and 2FR. Okay, that's actually all we need on that class. And then we have our cell class, and what are we going to add here is just some padding. So I'm going to add padding, and this is shorthand padding, so we're going to go around the clock. We're going to define a value for the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. So it goes clockwise, if you could imagine a clock for the directions of top, right, bottom, left. And you can see now above our content has all been spaced out. So if we go and have a look, we can kind of see our content is laid out. What we are missing now is some borders, and so let's go ahead and create our borders for our table. So I'm going to bring up my code editor, and so all this code that we've done so far I'm just going to tidy up. This is our main table CSS. And I'm going to create one called border. Oop. Okay. Give us some room. Right, and we're going to create a nice big thick border that goes around the whole perimeter of our table. And we're going to apply that to the easy table class that we made. So I'm going to set a border of 4 pixels wide. It's going to be a solid border, and let's make that red. Then we have a nice big thick solid border, if we go and preview this, around the whole of our content. The next thing we want to do is we want to add a line, a horizontal line along the bottom of our content, bar the last one, because we've got this perimeter border. We actually don't need, on our last row here, we don't need a line at the bottom. And so there's some selectors that we can use in our CSS that enable us to do that. So I'm going to apply this to our easy table header and our easy table row. So our easy table and we easy table header, and we're joining these classes together, so comma, easy table row, and we actually only need to apply the special selector to our row because we only have one header row. So our easy table row, I'm going to use a selector called not, and then I'm going to tell it not on the last child, and then I'm going to set a border bottom 1 pixel that's solid and that is red. And you can see now that we have our border bottom along the bottom here, but of course it's not applying another border bottom to our last row here because it is the last row. Now if I add additional rows, and we can do that quite easily, so if we come over to our left panel here and we've got our easy table row, and if I duplicate, I'll get rid of our code editor. If I duplicate our row, you can see now that we've got additional rows here, but each time I add a row, it's going to add a red border at the bottom, but it's not going to add one at the bottom of the last child. So each one of these is considered a child under the easy table, and the last one won't have a border bottom. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense, but it's very cool because if we didn't have that, let me go back to our code editor. If I remove that, and I changed, if I removed that and I changed our border to one pixel, we'd actually end up with 2 pixels at the bottom. You can see the thickness there is different. So we don't want that. It's less noticeable with a big thick border around the whole table, but we only want a border bottom on all the rows bar the last one. So let's add that back. Right, and we're going to set the width of our whole table again back to 4. Okay. The next thing we want to add, so we've got our horizontal lines, is we want to add some vertical lines to the right of all our cells, but we want to do that on all of them bar the last one. So as long as they're not the last child, we want them to have a border right. So I'm going to add a very similar code to this one here, and that is going to be easy table header, and we're applying it to the cell, and we want to add the not selector, not the last child, and then we also want to add this to not only our table header but also our table easy table row. Actually, we want to go dot cell, not last child. So this will add our border right, 1 pixel, solid red. And as you can see now, we have our grid lines along the bottom and on the right hand side bar the last child in our rows. Cool. And of course it is responsive. In my example, I had a black background for our header with some white text, and so we can style that header. And we can do that by using easy table header. We're going to set the background to black and the color to white. for our content. Okay, the cool thing about this is that you can add content to any of the cells. So we could go in here, it's just point and click. We could rename this to column 1, column 2, column 3. And of course we could add things in here like we could add an image, and it will also be responsive. You can see our image shrink there. So you can add lots of content to this sort of table. It's quite cool, very easy. Okay, one of the other things in my example is that for every second row we had a different or alternative background color, and we can create that using one line of CSS. I'm going to add row color. I'm going to add one class called Easy Table Row. Then I'm going to use some fancy selectors. I'm going to use inth, which is nth, nth child. And you can go do some research on how this works. It's a little bit complex. There's lots of variables that you can use here. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call it 2n plus 3. So I've got easy table row, and the selector is nth child, and then in the brackets 2n plus 3. And what this means is that every second row in our table will apply this style. And the style that I'm going to give it is a background of light grey. And there you can see it changed. I'm going to preview this and see it's just our second row that has the grey background. We can of course add multiple rows. So again, with our easy table row selected, I can just keep duplicating that. And as you scroll down, you'll see that every second row has got that light grey property. Awesome. That's pretty straightforward. Okay, so that's a quick overview on how to build basic or simple tables just using divs and a really small amount of CSS. I'm just going to bring up once again that CSS. So you can pause the video if you want to have a look at the CSS that I've created here. Let's see if I can fit in as much as I can. There we go. You can pause it there to have a look at what I've got. Great. Have an awesome day. Take care.